This is Booked on Rock. I'm Rick Senich. Our guest this episode, Christy Alexander Hallberg, author of Searching for Jimmy Page. Searching for Jimmy Page is the fictional story of Luna Kane. The unraveling of 18-year-old Luna's haunted past begins in the winter of 1988, when her dying great-grandfather, a self-proclaimed faith healer, claims he hears phantom owls crying in the night. It triggers Luna's repressed memory of her dead mother's obsession with Jimmy Page, Led Zeppelin's legendary guitar wizard. Desperate to learn the truth about her mother's suicide, to tease fact from family lore in order to weave her own personal narrative, Luna embarks on a pilgrimage from her family's farm in the pines of eastern North Carolina to England to search for the man whose music her mother held sacred, Jimmy Page. Christy Alexander Hallberg teaches literature and writing online at East Carolina University. She serves as Senior Associate Editor of North Carolina Literary Review. Her short fiction, creative nonfiction, book reviews, and interviews have appeared in such journals as North Carolina Literary Review, StorySouth, Main Street Rag, Fiction Southeast, Riggwelter, Deep South Magazine, Eclectica, Litro, STORGY Magazine, Entropy, and Concho River Review. Her flash story, Aperture, was chosen Story of the Month by Fiction Southeast for October 2020 and was selected by the editors of the annual Best Small Fiction Anthology series for the 2021 edition. She lives near Asheville, North Carolina. To hear a playlist of the music discussed in this episode, just head over to the show notes page. Christy, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I had so much fun reading this book. I was telling you before we started recording, this is the very first fiction book that we're doing an interview on.
Yay! That's great.
Yeah, so interesting.
I'm honored. I'm honored to be the first.
It's such an interesting approach to the classic rock genre and Led Zeppelin specifically. I want to start with your dedication to the book, which is to your mom, Frances Baker Alexander, who you write, never owned a tie-dye shirt or tarot cards, but loved cashmere and immigrant song. She also helped you cover your bedroom walls with Led Zeppelin posters when you were a teenager. Also, we have your brother. Now, we share something in common here. My two older brothers introduced me to Led Zeppelin and all these great classic rock artists. For you, it was your brother, Steve. Can you talk about when you became a Led Zeppelin fan and how your mom and your brother helped with that?
Yes. I'm the youngest of four, and the next to the youngest is 10 years older than I, and that's my brother, Steve. And I grew up kind of hero worshiping him. He was a very good drummer, and he played in lots of rock bands around my hometown, and he idolized John Bonham. So I remember growing up seeing posters in his room and, of course, hearing the music sporadically, but I'd never really encountered the band. But when my mother and I went to church one Sunday, of all places, came home, I think it was 1984 or 5, and I was 15. We came home, and Steve was sprawled out on the sofa watching The Song Remains the Same. MTV was broadcasting it. And my reaction, I listened to Dave Lewis's show with you, and I was so moved by what he said his reaction initially was to Led Zeppelin. I wrote it down. He said, after seeing Zepp live in 1971, things were never the same at our house after that. It became a way of life. It became an obsession. It became a passion, and I wanted to share that passion. My reaction was just as visceral. I took one look at the screen, and Jimmy Page was on the screen, and it was like looking at a dark angel with a sixth string. It was just so mesmerizing. I was captivated. So it was instantaneous, and it's never let up. And I'm almost 52 years old. So this is a long time coming, but it's all, that obsession is all wrapped up with my brother and my mother. She was there too. And she was very conservative. She was the type of Southern woman. She was much older than my friends' mothers, and she never pierced her ears. She wore clip-on earrings. She never wore makeup except for maybe pressed powder or something. And she was just very conservative, but she recognized the passion that I had. And she sat there and watched the movie with me, and they did an encore presentation that night. And she set up her ironing board in the living room and watched with me and listened to me. Gosh, oh, Mom, did you see that? Did you see, look how he's playing the double neck. Look what he's doing with the bow. And she became very much a part of that passion. So the book is really a love song to her, to my brother, and to Jimmy Page, of course.
You write that the seed was first sown for this book project during the final months of your mother's battle with cancer. Your husband, Bill, also plays a role in getting this book done. Can you talk about that?
Well, he loved the story that, okay, after my mother died in 2003 of cancer, and it was devastating for me. I really went into a tailspin for a while there, and finally decided I've got to do something to shake myself out of this. I've got to do something out of character. And it was then that I heard that Jimmy Page and Brian May of Queen were going to be judging a guitar contest in England that summer. This was 2005 by now. And I said, that's it, I'm going. I'd never been out of the country before, didn't have a passport, but I just knew somehow that if I could make that journey, and he was the constant in my life, who was all wrapped up in that relationship with my brother and my mother. And I just knew that if I could make that trip and be in the same room with him, that maybe I could have the courage to get my life back together. So my husband always liked hearing that story. I met my husband a few years after that, and really just spent time enjoying being alive again. And he got sick and died of cancer in 2014. But before he died, he made me promise that I would finish this book. So it's sort of a bittersweet thing that it's getting ready to come out, because it's like fulfilling a promise to two people who meant so much to me.
And there's the inspiration, and you do thank
Right.
Jimmy Page for his gift of music and magic and Led Zeppelin, and you quote one of the all-time great Led Zeppelin songs, Thank You, in your
Thank you.
acknowledgments, and some specific lyrics. Inspiration's what you are to me. Inspiration, look, see. That was important for you to include that in the book.
Yeah.
What I love about this book is that you do include also Jimmy's solo work, which is really cool, because I love listening to Jimmy's solo work as well. He's such a unique guitarist, and his internal rhythm and the way he plays, the phrasing of his guitar is unlike anything else. And you use his 1988 solo album, Outrider, as a starting point for this story. And it's really what kickstarts the main character's journey.
It was a no-brainer that I would set the book in 1988 when that album came out, even though it's largely set in the winter of 1988, and the album didn't come out until the summer. So I had to kind of do some finagling and get my main character, Luna, a promo copy of the album, so I could actually discuss it and use it in the plot. But I was so excited when that album came out. I remember he did a 2-hour rock line, and you could call in and talk to him. And I was so excited about that. And I dialed for a solid hour. I had one of those rotary princess phones in my room. I was 18 years old. And I'm actually dialing over and over again. It's busy signal after busy signal. And at one point I got so frustrated, my conservative mother said, okay, just take a break, go get a soda, I'll dial. And I had this vivid memory and picture of her in my head, sitting at my desk in my room, dialing over and over and over, so her neurotic daughter could go chill out for a few minutes.
That's great. That was one of those albums, for anybody who's curious about which album that would be, because it was one kind of sort of hit. It was like a rock radio hit, Wasting My Time.
Yeah, I remember the video too.
Yeah, but it didn't have any breakthrough hit. It wasn't like The Firm. It didn't have anything. And I used to see it from time to time. It would be in the bargain bins at the record stores, and I thought, well, is this good? Is it? I mean, if it's in the bargain bin, maybe it's not that good. And finally, years later, I get around to listening to it, and it's just cool. If you love Jimmy Page, you'll love pretty much everything he does anyway. But there's just some great guitar work, and he does have Robert Plant on one of those tracks too.
He does, yeah, a song called "The Only One."
It's definitely worth a listen for anybody who's a Zeppelin fan who kind of is not sure whether they want to listen to all of Jimmy's stuff post-Zeppelin. Give that a listen. But I always love The Firm, those two albums he did with
Me too.
Yeah. In
Absolutely.
fact, that second album is much like Outrider.
Mean Business.
Mm-hmm. And that didn't have any quote-unquote hits, so it kind of got ignored and forgotten. But there's a lot of good stuff on there. So tell me about this character, Luna Kane. Is she based on somebody you know? Several people? How much of it is yourself? What went into forming this character?
She's been wandering around in my imagination for a very long time. And yeah, I do see some of myself in her, but she's a lot cooler than I am. I think she's smarter than I am, more talented, braver. She's all the things I wish I were. So she's, I don't know, she's just always been kind of knocking around in my head, wanting to show up in a story. And she came out fully fledged when I started writing about her. And I don't typically outline when I write. And that's, I think, the case a lot of the times with writers who write literary fiction. It's more character based than plot driven. So you have to let the characters really tell you where they're going. So it was quite a journey trying to get all this out because I really had to get to know her in order for the story to really take shape. When I first started writing, I had the first chapter and I had the last line, but I really didn't know how I was going to get from A to Z. It took getting to know her better.
The opening chapter sets the scene of this woman whose great-grandfather is in his last moments, and he asks if she hears the owls. And I'm very curious as to your choice of the owl. It's important here because it's pivotal in kickstarting Luna's journey. I know there is spiritual meaning to the owl. Were you thinking in those terms?
Yes. I mean, I knew I was going to use owls because I wanted to use the song Four Sticks as a motif in the book. That was playing in Luna's mother's bedroom when she committed suicide. So, and Luna I always pictured Luna as having what's called dissociative amnesia. She witnessed her mother's suicide and then blocked it out. So when her great-grandfather mentions hearing owls right before he dies, that kind of kicks her back into that moment where all of that stuff begins to come rushing back to her. So the owl is significant because of the song, but it's also significant because of all the mythology around it. And like the great-grandfather used to say to her, owl in the house means death's coming. And then there's some Native American belief systems have the owl being a totem. So it really is multifaceted. I use it in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I did a quick Google search of it, and the spiritual meaning, wisdom, intuition, supernatural power, independent thinking, and observant listening.
Yeah.
And her great-grandfather's last words are somewhat cryptic. He quotes a verse in the Bible, Ecclesiastes 6:10.
Yeah.
That which hath been is named already.
Yes.
Luna's destiny is laid out for her in this opening chapter. This scene that you so beautifully lay out in this chapter, does this come to you like a musician with a song? Because I'm so curious about this stuff, because I could never do this. Just like that's why I love musicians so much, because how do they write these songs? Do they come to? So does this come to you like a musician with a song? Is it instant? Do you go through several versions of this chapter before you finally finish it?
Oh my gosh. I wrote that chapter so many times. This book is so many years in the making, and it's been through many different incarnations. So, but that Bible verse was a constant. I always had that. I knew I would use that. And I think that's something that the book kind of grapples with. Is her destiny laid out, or does she have the power to choose her own destiny? And that sort of dichotomy in how she views her life and her identity is what she's sort of wrestling with throughout the story. Like, do I have to have a name? Do I have to have the name that my parents have in order to know who I am? Or does that matter? Can I just create my own identity?
And her great-grandfather's last words, the sounds of the owl, the Bible verse, the sleet pelting on the windows. This moment triggers Luna's memory of that traumatic moment when she was a child. Her mother sadly took her life. She remembers seeing her mother in her bedroom with a black and white picture of Jimmy Page by her side. There really is nothing at this point that will hold Luna back from the journey of discovery she's about to go on at this point.
Yeah. Since you mentioned the photo, I've always loved that photo, that 1973 black and white Jimmy Page on stage at Kezar Stadium. I was always mesmerized by that because he's got his arms outstretched and his lips are pursed and his hair's unruly, and he looks beautiful, but he looks, it's almost like it's a Christ-like imagery with that. It's almost like the sacrificial lamb, the way that he is posing in that picture. And I wanted to use that in the story.
And Luna's mother Claudia, I picture a Stevie Nicks-like character, very much.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, very much
I
into
like that.
mysticism and the spirits and worlds beyond
Right?
this world. In chapter 2, we get to the story behind Luna's name. Luna is the Roman goddess of the moon, bright and beautiful
Right.
and strong. This story comes
Hmm.
from a flashback that Luna is having when her mother is telling her the story. And you can certainly see how Claudia would have connected with Jimmy Page. Zeppelin fans
Hmm.
know how fascinated Jimmy was and likely still is with black magic and spirits. He once purchased the former home of occultist Aleister Crowley, which was a Gothic manor on the south side of Loch Ness in the Scottish Highlands. When and where does Claudia first meet Jimmy Page in your story?
I don't really specify, and I can't really say for sure when she first encountered Jimmy. Since it's told from the perspective of Luna, the focus is more on when was Luna introduced to Jimmy Page. Luna was born when Claudia was 18 or 19 years old, I think. So Jimmy would have probably already been a fixture in her life, and he became much more so after Luna is born for various reasons, and definitely shares her obsession with him, with her daughter, and is constantly plays his music to her. So Luna has always grown up in the shadow of Jimmy Page in a way.
And can you talk a little bit more about the significance of that Zeppelin song, Four Sticks?
I've just always loved that song. That is one of my favorites on the fourth album. There's something so primal about it. There's like the clash between the masculine and feminine in a way. There's that hard jungle beat and Bonzo's drums and Jimmy's searing guitar, and then you get that dum 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 part, and it sounds like water almost. And so you get that kind of reprieve. And I was always interested in the complexity of it, how multidimensional that song is, not just with lyrics, but the music always spoke to me. And so I don't know, other than just I really like it for those reasons, why I wanted to use it as the song Claudia was fixated on, but it seemed like a natural choice.
The late, great John Bonham using the Four
Ugh,
Sticks. That's how they came up with
yeah.
that title. There is that strong connection, as we mentioned, to the Outrider album, Jimmy Page's solo album, and she just can't get it out of her head. Eventually, she decides she's leaving North Carolina. She's going to London to get some answers. Now, throughout this story, the music of Led Zeppelin is essentially a soundtrack. You drop in names of albums and songs. Chapter 12, Luna is playing Physical Graffiti on her boombox. It is her favorite Zeppelin album.
Mm-hmm.
Kashmir, Night Flight, and Houses of the Holy, her personal picks from the album. So I'm curious as to what is your favorite album and song. Is it Four Sticks?
Oh God! How do you pick a favorite album and song?
That's
from
why
Led
I ask
Zeppelin?
it. That's why I ask, because I like to see people.
You want to see me squirm?
Yeah, I want to see you squirm.
Oh gosh.
A common answer is, well, what's my favorite song today? Yeah, tomorrow it might be different, but yeah, what's the most recent Zeppelin song you've listened to?
I heard rock and roll yesterday.
There you go.
And I love rock and roll. I love all their music, but Four Sticks is especially important to me now that this book is coming out into the world. And so now that I have a real connection to it, just like the characters do. So that probably has gone way up to the top of the list. I mean, who doesn't love the fourth album? But I love the third album too, because I've been to Bronyar and seeing where a lot of that, where they took inspiration for that album, and it's such an amazing location. So that album is near and dear to my heart.
Tell me about that. What led to that trip?
Yeah.
Was that part of your research for the book or just your own personal journey?
When I did that pilgrimage in 2005 to go to try to see Jimmy Page, I also went to Bronyar. I was there. I was in the UK for, I guess, a week. And I just spent a couple of days in Wales. And the weird thing is I got there. I was on my own and bumbled my way to the bed and breakfast where I was staying and asked the woman working there if she could get me a taxi driver. And the guy who showed up just so happens that his grandmother owned a pub and hotel in Mackinac, which is the village close to where Bronyar is. And he told me that the guys, because there was no electricity, running water and such in the cottage, said the guys would every few days come down to his grandmother's hotel and shower and have drinks and that sort of thing. So that was an interesting, this great point of convergence there.
For those who don't
It
know
was,
about this, it's an 18th century cottage. It's picturesque. It's almost off
yeah.
something you'd see on a postcard.
Yeah, it's bucolic. It's just beautiful. You see the mountains, the Snowdonia Mountains around, and it's just gorgeous. And you have to park and walk. I don't know how far it is now because it's been so long since I've been. I can't really remember, but you have to walk up a path, and so you're sidestepping sheep dung all the way, and then all of a sudden at the end of the path, it just comes into view that the cottage, and it's amazing.
It's just on the outskirts of Wales.
Yeah.
So, an interesting section in chapter 12. Luna's character clearly doesn't buy into the myths that Jimmy Page inserted subliminal satanic messages in Zeppelin's music. Anna burns a book by Jacob Aronza. Is it? Do I pronounce it right?
I guess that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah, which is all about subliminal messages in rock music. Was this important for you to get this into the storyline?
I did. I wanted to, it's just, excuse my language, but it's such bullshit. And I wanted to I actually have that book that I referenced in there. And initially I had a quote from that book in there, and I thought there is no way I'm going to track this guy down and ask permission to use this and give him publicity and all that kind of thing. But it was ridiculous, the rumors that came out. And I saw an interview that Jimmy Page gave, I think a couple years ago, and he was asked about that, and he was adorable. He said, well, when somebody first told us about that, I thought, my God, it's hard enough to write this stuff one way, let alone backwards. And it's just ridiculous. So Luna is very level-headed, and she doesn't fall for that kind of silly stuff.
That's great. Sadly, some of it goes too far, and they blame guys like Ozzy Osbourne for
right
tragedies, kids that take their lives, and they want to blame
Absolutely.
it on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Luna gets on a Greyhound bus and heads for London. She recalls her mother saying, "Tell me a story." She puts pen to paper. Turns out she can write, and she's writing poetic snippets worthy of a Led Zeppelin song. I was picturing Robert Plant singing these words. You could be a lyricist for Jimmy's next album, or maybe Robert and Alison Krauss. But yeah, or even Paul Rogers singing those words. She writes of a bird on the wing when flight meets night, and that poem made me think of a song Jimmy wrote for Led Zeppelin. And I'm sure you know this, but it ended up being used on the Firm album called Midnight Moonlight.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know that was supposed to be for a song after Into the Outdoor. Okay. So I
did not know that.
After Into the Outdoor, sadly, John Bonham passed. But that was one of the songs Jimmy was working on, and that would have been something he would have brought to the table for Robert to sing. And then it never happened. And then he forms the Firm, and Paul Rogers gives it a listen and says, all right, let's put some words to it. And there you have it.
Oh, gosh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and
interesting.
Yeah, those words that Luna is writing reminded me of that song. Definitely, people should give that one a listen. That's a great tune.
Yeah.
The scenery now changes. We find ourselves in London with Luna, and there's a misty rain. She ducks inside a pub in Earl's Court. The decor straight out of a Charles Dickens novel. How much time did you spend in London? You had to have gotten a good sense of it. The way you write it just feels like you're there.
Well, I've been 4 times, always on my own and always going to Zeppelin sites. I've been to all of the locations mentioned in the book at least once. So, yes, I have spent some time there, and the last time I went was in 2018. So I was putting the finishing touches on the book and wanted a refresher. So I went back, but that scene in the pub that you just mentioned, a lot of that actually happened to me when I went. I went in and mistook this guy, and this guy was trying to let me walk past, and I thought he was asking me to sit down. So poor Luna. Yeah, I feel her pain.
I had a feeling this came from a personal experience. All right. That's funny. Chapter 18, Luna is meant to be in London. That word destiny comes back. You write the grayness of a London dawn, like mystery, enigma. Connie had once asked me if I were a season, what would I be? Autumn, I'd said. It's neither hot nor cold. I don't want to be defined. She'd smirked. Figures. Aren't you going to ask me what color I'd be? I'd said, oh, I already know that. Something dark and depressing. Midnight blue, maybe. I'd shaken my head. I'd be gray. That's not a color, she'd insisted. Yeah, it is. It's a color without color. It's the color of a London dawn. That's another one that is written by somebody who had to have been in London.
Yeah.
Did you see a lot of those days, those gray days in London?
Yeah, I did, especially when I went in 2018. When I went in 2005, 6, and 15, it was always the summer. And when I went in 2018, it was March. And it was frickin' cold and gray and snowy and really miserable. Now, having said that, I love London. I would live there in a flat minute if I could.
So Luna arrives at the home of Jimmy Page. It's by the banks of the Thames, the river's edge, swans floating in the freezing water, and this is where she meets Jimmy's wife. Unexpected, as she was planning on leaving an envelope for Jimmy, then leave, but there she is in the doorway, and in that envelope is Luna's letter, her mother's photos. At first, she slides the envelope under the gate, but then she panics. Jimmy's wife will see it and burn it, and she takes that envelope back and runs away. So now the suspense is really picking up. And this is an interesting part of storytelling. It's much like a great song. There's building up that suspense with moments of almost but not quite resolution. How difficult are these types of chapters to write?
They're fun to write. I really have a good time when I'm in a chapter where I need to ratchet up the tension. That's always a lot of fun. You mentioned the house. That was Old Mill House in Windsor, not Tower House in London. And that's where John Bonham died. And I've been there too, of course, not inside, but I wanted to capture the gravity of the moment for her. It was like a do or die. I've got to get this in there. And yet she doesn't meet his wife, but the wife is coming outside and she sees her. And so she ducks. But I wanted to, and it was a perfect location to kind of ratchet up that tension, because that location is such such a sad thing happened there. Not only did this person lose his life, but it was the end of the band as well, and I'm sure has had lifelong implications for all concerned. So it was I was very moved when I was there, and so it was easy to kind of translate that into the writing.
And she's right there. You're thinking this is it. And also, I believe in the background, there is someone that says, Jimmy's on the phone for you. He wants to talk to you.
Yeah. Talking to the wife.
Right. Now,
yeah, come in, wife, and answer the phone.
And Luna didn't know he was married. I get the sense.
No.
So she was surprised by that. Yeah. And John Bonham's name comes up often towards the later chapters. Luna visits his gravesite under a full moon. This is where she wonders if not just Bonzo, but the other band members and their manager, Peter Grant, the late, great Peter Grant, maybe knew her mother. What would life have been like if her mother and Jimmy ended up together and she became a part of the Zeppelin family? I thought it was interesting how John Bonham helped to further the storyline, particularly the what if part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
That was something that you really wanted to get John Bonham in there.
I did. Well, I have a story about visiting his grave. And I didn't put this in the book because I thought it would never work in fiction. It's just too convenient, too coincidental. But I don't know if you've ever been to his grave, but it's...
No, I'm curious. Is it just a small little tombstone? Is it a big one?
It's a big headstone, and fans bring drumsticks and all the stuff that I mentioned in that scene in the book. That's actually what it's like. People put drum cymbals there. They put, which I think this is in bad taste. They put alcohol there. They put flowers and notes and all kinds of things there. And it's in this beautiful churchyard with all of these very old graves there. And the parish is quaint and beautiful. But when I went, his sister showed up, Deborah. And nobody else was there in the cemetery. I had a taxi driver waiting for me, but I was standing there paying tribute to John, and his sister showed up, and we got to talking, and it was interesting because it wasn't a conversation between this woman and a starstruck, person there visiting her brother's grave. It was between two people who had big brothers who were drummers, and we both idolized our brothers, and we wound up talking about that. So I got to hear about John as opposed to Bonzo, the wild rock man. And it was a very special meeting. I remember she hugged me before I left. And I will always treasure that memory of that encounter, but I didn't think it would work in the book.
That's incredible. This was an unexpected meeting?
Yeah.
It wasn't like...
Yeah. I was just standing there and she showed up. She just happened. I don't recall that it was any particular anniversary or any day that should have brought her there. She just happened to be there or to come there while I was there.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
I wonder if any of these guys will end up reading this book. I think they would enjoy it. Wouldn't that be cool?
It would be. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, Dave Lewis may reach out to one of those guys.
Gosh. Well, I remember him saying on the episode of your podcast that he recently did that he was able to hand Jimmy his book and Robert and John Paul Jones. And I was listening to that going, oh, my God, what if?
Yeah, right.
I hope.
So let's get back to the story here. So Luna makes a trip to the legendary Headley Grange, the former workhouse in Headley, Hampshire, England. Led Zeppelin 3, Led Zeppelin 4, Houses of the Holy, Physical Graffiti, all composed and or recorded there. And it's known to be haunted. Talk about symbolic, the perfect location for this story. The spirits of Zeppelin, Jimmy Page, possibly Luna's past, all there. There is a moment when she's getting the tour of the place that she thinks, could my mother's spirit have been here at one time? She wonders if Claudia was the woman bathed in white light singing in the bedroom where Jimmy slept. This comes from an actual story Jimmy later told, I believe, right?
Not that I know of.
No, I thought he said
probably,
okay.
But
oh, then this is cool.
I don't know.
So
Tell me.
He was saying that I think it was the bedroom that was haunted while they were in there recording. He said he saw a ghost.
Good grief! I've never heard that. How could I have not heard that?
I thought that's maybe where you got that from. How about that? Mm-mm. So there is.
I'm psychically in tune with Jimmy Page.
Cosmic connection there. Yeah, fascinating. And we finally get to the moment where Luna is in the same room as Jimmy Page. It's at a guitar contest Jimmy was part of with Brian May of Queen, which now you've told me this is an actual event that took place. So that inspired that part of the story. But it's at the Hammersmith Palais. I only wish I could put into words what it's like meeting your favorite rock star the way you do in this book. I mean, it's just beautifully written. She's face to face with Jimmy for a brief moment before the show. And then you write, he was less than 4 feet away. He dropped a piece of paper, bent down to pick it up. I could see the top of his head, the crown, where his black hair was just beginning to thin. He rose, and for a second I caught his eye. 1 second is but a flash, a swirling, whirling flash. 1,000 milliseconds take time. They tick by like heartbeats. 1 millisecond, 2 milliseconds, 3 milliseconds, like pulses of memory coursing through your veins. A concert movie at a dusty drive-in, the ashes of an incinerated poster. A cunning stare from the cover of a record album. You can live a lifetime in the space they occupy. You can see it all in 2 vitreous orbs. I am curious as to the process you go through in writing a moment like that. Do you go through several drafts of that? Does it come to you out of nowhere?
Oh, hell
again?
Yes.
Yeah.
yeah, that took time.
When do you finally know it's right? When
I don't know.
I mean, it's like I think of, you could be almost like Axl Rose writing a song and take several years before you finally say, okay, fine, here it is. Take this is the final one. How many revisions?
I couldn't even begin to tell you. There were so many. It was so many years in the making. And to answer your question, how do you know when it's done? You don't. After a while, you abandon it. After a while, you send it out and show it to somebody else and say, well, what do you think? What's missing? What's not working here? And you learn who to send it out to, whose opinion you really can trust, and you learn what feedback to implement and what feedback to just let go, because you have to have your own vision too of what your story is that you stay true to. But it took me a long time, and for moments like that, they're fun to write, but there's pressure on because you don't want to slip into melodrama, and you don't want it to be sentimental or for it to be over the top or anything like that. So I was trying to pull back and lengthen that moment and kind of really put her inside of it and explore what this felt like, because in reality they happen very fast. And I wanted to really latch on to the importance of the moment for her to really be standing right in front of him. And see, the very same thing happened to me when I was at the Hammersmith Palais. I was standing in line, and he came in the same way I did. And I thought, what in the world? Rock stars are coming in through the main entrance. I figured there was some portal that they just magically appear in the building. And I couldn't, I was so taken off guard and dumbfounded that I just stood there and stared and didn't say anything. So I had like 3 encounters with him where I could have talked to him and didn't, just couldn't. And then finally, when he was leaving is when something snapped in me, and I just ran after him, chased him down the hall. And that's what happens to Luna.
I can just imagine that moment when you're standing in front of them, like, just, what do I do? You teach literature at East Carolina University, right?
Correct. Literature and various writing, like business writing, freshman comp, creative writing.
So
yeah.
You must have a lot of these situations. Somebody comes to you saying, and they get frustrated. They get stuck somewhere and they want to give up.
You have to have so much patience to be a writer or an artist in general. I think you have to, and you have to live a little bit. It's the rare artist who can just come out of the gate as a kid and create something brilliant. They're out there, but they're rare. It takes living a life and gaining experience and perspective and learning your craft and knowing that, as a writing teacher told me one time, you have to be willing to write a whole lot of shit for a long time until you finally recognize what your voice is, what your style is, and how to get it right. So I tell people, you have to have patience and you have to be kind to yourself and not, if something is laborious, it's not coming out right, you're not happy with the end result, be kind to yourself about it, because you're learning, and everything that you write matters, because it's shaping you into the artist that, if you're tenacious, you will one day be.
Big step sharing it with other people too.
Oh yeah. And that's so hard. When I teach creative writing workshops, I tell them before the first workshop, look, I feel your pain. I know that this is awkward, putting your work out there and having everybody throw in their 2 cents about it. And that's your baby. That's something that, and they always come into the workshop thinking that what they presented is worthy of a Pulitzer. So you kind of have to disabuse them of that without tearing them down a notch. You just have to let them know, look, no, you're putting your work out there because you want it to be better, which by definition means it's not there yet.
And critics are going to always be there to critique.
Oh, sure.
Especially now with the internet, everybody can comment.
Oh, yeah. And you could be the greatest writer in the world and somebody's going to give you a crappy review.
So we finally get to the moment where Luna is in the same room as Jimmy Page. It's at that guitar contest. There's that moment after the show. She's watching Jimmy's bodyguards taking him away, and it's now or never, and this is coming from your own experience. She starts running towards him, and then there's a moment of levity in there. I love it. Some Zeppelin humor. You write, there was a stairway at the end of the hall before it curves around and leads back to the vestibule. A stairway, for Christ's sake. I love that.
I know. I thought, well, that's how I felt when I actually did chase him to the stairway. I'm thinking, are you kidding me? We're at the stairway. Well, it turned out not to be to heaven, but whatever.
I love it. That was great. We're going to leave people in suspense. Does she finally get that envelope to Jimmy?
You.
Yes. If so, does he read it? Does he look through the photos? How does this story end? Is Jimmy Page Luna Kane's father? Yeah, listeners will have to get a copy of Searching for Jimmy Page. It is out this Wednesday, October the 20th, through Livingston Press at the University of West Alabama. Christy, where can people get the book? Of course, Amazon is the usual place, but any other sites, any other links?
I've got a bunch of links on my website, so that if you're somebody who wants to order from an indie bookstore, I've got links to that, or you could order from Amazon. So you could just go to my website, www.ChristyAlexanderHallberg.com.
Okay.
And you could find that there.
And Hallberg spelled?
Hallberg.
Yep. And I will also put the link up on the show notes page.
Lovely.
And how about social media pages?
Oh, yeah. I am on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook at Christy Hallberg. If anybody listening lives in the New York area, I'm giving my launch reading at New York City's KGB Bar Red Room, October 21st at 7 p.m.
Wow, that's coming up.
I know. I'm excited.
That's cool. So any future projects you have in mind that you can talk about?
Believe it or not, I'm working on a sequel to this.
Ooh.
Yeah. So that's I know every time I tell people that who've read the book, they say, "What? What else are you going to talk about?" And I'm not going to say anything about it, but the idea came and wouldn't leave me alone. So I've started tinkering with it, and we'll see what happens. But that's what I'm working on right now.
Wow, that's cool. How long of a time period do you set aside to write a book? It could be years.
I don't. It's however long it takes.
It's however long it takes. Like you said, sometimes it comes to you. Sometimes you have to go to it. And
right.
Christy, this was great.
Thank you so much for having me on. This was so much fun, and I really appreciate your deciding to read the book and talk about it. That's great.
Thanks to Christy Alexander Hallberg for taking us through her book, Searching for Jimmy Page. Make sure you subscribe to Booked on Rock at Spreaker or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. You can find us online at bookedonrock.com, on Facebook at facebook.com/bookedonrockpodcast, on Twitter at bookedonrock. The email address is thebookedonrockpodcast@gmail.com. You can also contact me through our website. If you're an author of a book on rock and you want to be on the podcast, just send me an email. I'm Eric Senich. Thanks as always for listening, and join me again next time for another episode of Booked on Rock.